This past summer, our goal was simple enough: to explore as much of the Scottish Hebrides as possible aboard our sailboat Petronella. We'd been hoping to make this voyage for several years, to wander among Scotland's western isles, where mountains fall straight into the sea and where weather still rules daily life. We had charts, some local knowledge, and a vague plan to follow the wind as far as the summer and the weather would allow. But of course, as every sailor knows, the sea has its own ideas. Before we even set sail, the sea reminded us who's really in charge. Over the winter, a hurricane swept through the marina where Petronella was stored on the Hard. 2 boats fell onto her during the storm, leaving their calling cards on her hull and lifelines. So our summer began not with adventure, but with sandpaper, paint, and a good dose of Scotch whiskey. It's said that cruising is fixing things in exotic places, and Ardfern turned out to be the perfect place to start doing just that. But it wasn't all work. The marina sits on the Craignish Peninsula, tucked between lochs and low mountains. On days when the rain let up, and even when it didn't, we wandered through the countryside. Mists drifted across the hills, rivers wound through forests of dripping green. Here and there an old stone house stood by the sea, its windows watching the tide come and go. It felt like the landscape was breathing along with the weather, sometimes quiet, sometimes wild. One afternoon, we hiked out to Craignish Point, following a path through a green meadow. Sheep and cows grazed by the cliffs, completely unimpressed by our enthusiasm. At the end of the point stood a building that guarded an old stone pier, and from there you could look out towards the open sea, and it felt like the edge of the world. A few days later, we visited Canarsie Castle, just inland from Ardfern. It's a ruin now, but an elegant one, tall and windswept, built in the 1500s. We climbed the narrow spiral staircase to the top, where the view stretches across the valley. Standing there, you can almost hear the ghosts of the past. And finally, after days of work and sightseeing, Ardfern gave us a gift, one perfect, calm evening. The air went still, the water turned to glass, reflecting the hills, the boats, and the sky in a mirror of silver and blue. We wandered the shoreline, snapping photos. It felt like the world had stopped just long enough to say, "All right, you're ready now." The repairs were done, the forecast was improving, and Petronella was eager to stretch her sails. Our summer was about to begin. We had no fixed itinerary, no reservations, just a boat, a barometer, a friend, and a willingness to see where the weather would take us. Our voyage began with a shakedown cruise to make sure Petronella was ready for the sea. The forecast promised a light southwesterly breeze, perfect for the short run to Puila, a sheltered anchorage tucked between islands and low hills. The name was difficult to pronounce, but the place itself was perfect. A finger of calm water surrounded by green slopes and gray rock. As we dropped anchor, we realized we had neighbors, a seal nursery. All afternoon, we watched the seals at play. So graceful in the water, so awkward ashore, they put on an endlessly fascinating show. For us, it was a gentle welcome back to life afloat. The next day, the weather forecast warned that the wind would soon veer northwest, making Puila uncomfortable. So before the change arrived, we weighed anchor and sailed to Lochaline, a long protected loch with wooded hills and water as clear as glass. It was an easy, satisfying sail, Petronella moving clearly through the waves, each creak and hum sounding just right. We spent 3 nights in Lochaline, and it felt like time slowed down. We took long walks ashore, exploring the grounds of a grand Victorian house whose gardens were returning to nature. Rhododendrons bloomed where terraces once stood, and from the hill above we could see the Sound of Mull winding north between high blue-gray ridges. Those quiet days were the calm before the real challenges began. When the weather turned fair again, we raised anchor and set off through the Sound of Mull. The tide ran with us, the current swirling in patterns of silver, and we sailed between mountain slopes that seemed close enough to touch. Ahead lay Tobermory, the most colorful harbor in Scotland, a bright row of painted houses shining against the water. We dropped anchor there, planning to stay just a couple of nights, and we ended up staying a week. Tobermory has a way of holding you. The village is lively, the bakery's tempting, and there's always something interesting to watch in the busy harbor. But partway through our stay, the forecast began to darken. A deep Atlantic low was forming, expected to bring gale-force winds. 2 days later, the storm was upon us. Wind was howling over the hills, the rain slanting sideways. For 2 days, we listened to the gale and felt grateful for our safe harbor. Afterwards, we waited a few more days for the weather window that would let us begin our crossing to the Outer Hebrides. Those days were part of the rhythm of cruising, a mixture of patience and planning, knowing that the real schedule belongs to the sea. After several days of watching forecasts, we finally saw what we were waiting for, a stretch of fair weather long enough to visit the Outer Hebrides. We left Tobermory early, sails drawing nicely, the sea nearly flat beneath a sky brushed with high clouds. Our destination was Cana, one of the small isles, a quiet green gem halfway between the mainland and Skye. The crossing was easy, the kind that reminded us that our summer voyage was supposed to be a pleasure cruise. We arrived in late afternoon to find the anchorage already busy with visiting boats. On one side stood the Cana Rue Church, on the other St. Edward's Church, twin sentinels watching over the harbor. Among the anchored boats, we noticed one that stood out, Ming Ming 2, Roger Taylor's famous junk-rigged sailboat, veteran of several solo voyages into the Arctic. Seeing her there felt a bit like spotting a celebrity quietly minding her own business. We spent the evening in the cockpit, listening to the calls of seabirds echoing across the water. The next morning we set a course for Loch Barkaseg on the island of Skye, a short hop over calm seas. We anchored alone, the hills around us folded in soft light. As night fell, the only glow came from a single window of a house ashore, a small, warm square of light that felt oddly companionable. It was the kind of quiet that seems to suspend time. We were up early for the passage to Loch Matty, our first stop in the Outer Hebrides. The water was flat, with fog again obscuring the way, but we made our way across with the help of radar, and by late afternoon we were anchored in our first Hebridean harbor. We stayed 2 nights, taking walks and savoring the feeling of having truly arrived in the Outer Isles. From Loch Matty we sailed north to Tarbert, the narrow isthmus that joins the islands of Harris and Lewis. A few small repairs were waiting, and we needed parts, which meant a bus ride to Stornoway, home to the best chandlery in the islands. With our errands done, we rented a car and set off to explore. At Callanish, we stood among ancient standing stones, 5,000 years old, their faces turned towards the sea. Later, we wandered to the restored Garranan Blackhouse village, where crofters once lived under thatched roofs. It was history you could touch and feel looking back at you. The next day, repairs completed, we drove around South Harris under an improbably blue sky. At Luskintyre Beach, white sand and turquoise water stretched for miles, a scene more Caribbean than Scottish. We visited St. Clement's Church, its carved stones whispering stories from another age. For once, everything was easy. The boat was sound, the skies clear, the sea calm, but sailors know that fair weather never lasts long. Out in the Atlantic, the remnants of Hurricane Erin were turning north, forecast to reach Scotland within days. The Hebrides are beautiful, but they offer little shelter from big storms. We studied the charts, weighing our options. The answer was obvious, if not glamorous. It was time to retreat to the mainland, to a harbor with real protection. The islands had given us sunshine, silence, and a glimpse of history, and now a reminder that in the end, the sea always has the last word. But out there in the Hebrides, we were far from any safe harbor. We decided to head first to Rona Island on the north side of Skye. Of course, with Erin just days away, the wind disappeared entirely. We motored all the way to Rona, dropped anchor, and listened to the silence, the kind of stillness that makes you doubt a hurricane could be anywhere near. The next morning, we were motoring again, calm seas, bright sky, and hardly a breath of wind as we made our way into Plockton Harbor. We picked up a mooring and settled in to wait. When the storm finally arrived, it crossed the mainland just south of us. We had wind, we had rain, but nothing Petronella couldn't handle, just the kind of storms we'd seen many times before. The harbor was well protected, Petronella rode easily on her mooring, and we were not disappointed that the storm had mostly missed us. For several days after, we explored the countryside around Plockton. Walking lanes lined with stone walls and late summer heather, the hills washed clean by rain. It felt like the season had turned. The air had that first hint of autumn. We decided it was time to head home. We transited Loch Elsh, stopped at Mallig for the night, and the next morning had what turned out to be the best sail of the entire summer, a long, fast beam reach all the way to Tobermory. The sea was bright, the wind steady, and Petronella moved as if she knew the way. Our voyage was complete. We had reached the Outer Hebrides, circumnavigated Skye, and returned safely to where we began. It had been a summer of weather and wonder, of broken gear and quiet miracles, a season lived by the wind, the tide, and the stubborn heart of an old boat named Petronella. Thank you for coming along for the voyage and for sharing a little of the life we've found when we live, quite literally, by the sea.